शहंशाह औरंगज़ेब लईन ज़दारा दौरस्त दूरस्त दीन. Shahanshah Aurangzeb the Cursed, his reign is over and faith is far from him. These lines were written by the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, in his Zafarnama, which was a poetic letter he sent to Aurangzeb declaring his moral victory over the Mughals. Forever, the legacy of Aurangzeb will echo within these words. This is the legacy we'll go over in this video. I'm going to try and answer 3 questions about Aurangzeb. First, was he a good emperor? Second, was he an intolerant bigot who cracked down on minorities? And finally, did he destroy the Mughal Empire? This video is sponsored by Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a streaming service that hosts over 3,000 documentaries and shows in various genres, from history to science as well as travel and art. They're adding new shows all the time, which you can enjoy on all sorts of devices. Also, best of all, there are no ads and an increasing percentage of shows is available in 4K with no additional cost. They were kind enough to offer Al Muqaddimah viewers an extended free month-long trial. You can go to try.magellantv/Al Muqaddimah to take advantage of that. This week, I'm watching Race for Justice, which highlights the problems faced by the African American community in regards to their encounters with the police. It shows some heart-wrenching interviews with the families of some of the victims of police brutality, which is difficult to watch, but I'd still recommend it. Also, I recently watched Judgment Day, Images of Heaven and Hell. It explores how various cultures and religions across the world and across the centuries have viewed the afterlife. Again, you can take advantage of a month-long free trial by clicking the link in the description. It would also help support the channel. Back to the video. This video is a follow-up to my 2 previous videos discussing the remarkable life of Aurangzeb Alamgir. Be sure to watch those videos before watching this one to get a full idea of who Aurangzeb was. I think Richard Eaton nicely compares his story with Muhammad ibn Tughlaq's in this passage. In some ways, Alamgir's career eerily echoes that of Muhammad ibn Tughlaq. A little more than 3 centuries before Prince Aurangzeb waged successful campaigns in the Deccan, adding new territory to the Mughal Empire, Prince Ulugh Khan had led prolonged campaigns in the plateau, successfully adding large tracts of territory to the Delhi Sultanate. In 1325, he returned to Delhi and promptly usurped the throne of his father, becoming Sultan Muhammad ibn Tughlaq. In 1658, Prince Aurangzeb would follow the same path to supreme power. And just as Muhammad ibn Tughlaq returned to the peninsula towards the end of his reign, never again to see Delhi, and destined to spend his last years doggedly trudging from camp to camp, taking personal command of the day-to-day military operations while pursuing rebels who ever eluded his grasp, Alamgir suffered the same fate. Both men died in the field, far from Delhi. And for both men, prolonged absence from Delhi, where day-to-day administration lacked their personal supervision, combined with the drain of the state's treasury owing to costly wars waged far to the south, placed severe stresses on the fiscal and ultimately political stability of their respective empires. As Mark Twain reputedly said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Now, to the first question. Was he a good emperor? Shahanshah Aurangzeb Alamgir remained in power for almost 50 years. These 5 decades can be divided into roughly 2 equal halves. The first 25 years he spent in Delhi. The last 25 years he spent away from Delhi, first fighting the Rajput rebellion and then attacking the Deccan. The empire that he inherited was very prosperous and he kept it going. By the end of his reign, he had a larger population than all of Europe combined, and his empire generated 10 times the revenue of his contemporary King Louis XIV of France. Around 25% of the world's GDP belonged to the Mughal Empire. For at least the first half of his reign, Aurangzeb was very hands-on. He boasted about how much he worked and how he only slept 3 hours every night. For the second half, though, he was far away from the capital. The region that he was in was essentially a war zone and didn't produce that much revenue.
That meant that the richer provinces were being run while he was busy campaigning. Although he wasn't completely out of the loop. Aurangzeb received a newsletter of sorts daily about the various affairs of the state. He kept himself aware of everything going on, but he was just too far away to rule the empire well. In the Persianate cultures, an emperor's most important role was as a dispenser of justice. That's certainly how Aurangzeb saw himself, as he himself wrote. The greatest conquerors were not always the greatest kings. The nations of the earth have often been subjugated by mere uncivilized barbarians, and the most extensive conquests have, in a few short years, crumbled to pieces. He is the truly great king who makes it the chief business of his life to govern his subjects with equity. Aurangzeb tried to be as just as he could. He tried to formalize the empire's law code and make the law of the empire the true sovereign of the empire. This was an attempt to distance himself from his father, who had been at the center of his empire himself. Since Akbar, the Mughal Empire had been something of a personality cult with the emperor at the center. Aurangzeb wanted this to change, and for that he turned to the Hanafi school of Islamic jurisprudence. He issued his own collection of legal teachings called Fatawa-i-Alamgiri, although the success of this project is debated. At one point, Aurangzeb's son Azam Shah had failed to prevent robberies in his province. Aurangzeb immediately reduced his mansab and told him that for any other officer, the punishment would have been delivered after an investigation, but for a prince, the punishment is the absence of the investigation. So, at least for the first half, we know that Aurangzeb kept things running smoothly, but towards the end of his reign, when he was in the Deccan, the state of law and order in the empire was pretty bad. The seeds of the empire's downfall had been sown during his reign, and Aurangzeb, in my opinion, was directly responsible for it. One thing that I myself have criticized him for is not moving the mansabdars around, and while that's true, it's also kind of understandable. The empire needed more jagir to distribute among the mansabdars. When the empire ran out of new land, it meant that new mansabdars couldn't be appointed, so no new allies. It also meant that a mansabdar couldn't be moved as often as in Akbar's day. Without them regularly being moved, they were able to stay in one place and build support and power, and eventually became a problem for the emperor. In his defense, Aurangzeb understood this and actually banned adding new mansabdars late in his reign, but by then the damage was done. A question that arises in everyone's mind here is, why was Aurangzeb so determined to keep pushing into the Deccan? Even contemporary writers talk about this futile enterprise and how it was running the empire into the ground. Couldn't Aurangzeb see that? According to an Italian visitor who met the emperor in 1695, it was because Aurangzeb was scared of history repeating itself. He had seen how his father had let go of his authority and how easily he had deposed him. He understood that the emperors who stopped leading their armies become weak and vulnerable, and so he wanted to keep working till the day he died. Another reason was that the empire had written itself into a corner. Once it stopped expanding, it would collapse. All the allies that Aurangzeb was bringing into the Mughal fold needed a jagir, and for that he needed more land. Without that land, well, the Mughal Empire dwindled. Now, for the second question. Was Aurangzeb a bigot? As a prince, he was a pious Muslim. He prayed regularly, he didn't drink, stuff like that. This seems to have been a reaction to his father and Dara Shikoh, both of whom weren't exactly religious in an orthodox manner. Aurangzeb's views came to the forefront after the War of Succession, when Aurangzeb was looking for a reason to execute his brother. At that point, he accused his brother of blasphemy and of secretly being a Hindu, since Dara Shikoh had tried to reconcile Hindu scripture and the Quran. According to Islamic law, Aurangzeb was not a legitimate ruler, since he had overthrown his father, who was still alive. Aurangzeb tried to get a fatwa that since Shah Jahan was incapable of ruling, something that wasn't true, the throne was vacant and Aurangzeb was within the Islamic limits, but most clerics refused to issue this fatwa. The one that did was rewarded handsomely. After this came the famous discriminatory policies of Aurangzeb. He ended many traditions that previous emperors had adopted to be better integrated into Indian society. He stopped appearing in a charoka, which had been started to distance the emperor from his vassals. He stopped the tradition of weighing the emperor against gold on his birthday. Where he tried to curb the Hindu festival of Holi, he also stopped the celebration of Nowruz, the Iranian New Year. He also cracked down on Muharram festivities, which is a commemoration of the killing of the Prophet's grandson. Despite popular belief, he didn't ban music in the empire. He just banned it for himself. He did ban gambling and alcohol in the entire empire, but even his closest companions didn't follow the law in that. He once said that only 2 men in his empire didn't drink, himself and his chief Qadi. He ended many of the taxes and tolls collected from the merchants, but only for Muslim merchants. Non-Muslim merchants still technically had to pay them, but they usually got Muslims to handle their business to avoid paying them. In 1679, he reinstated the jizya, which was a head tax collected from non-Muslims. In return, they were exempt from military service. This tax was prohibited by Akbar and hadn't been collected ever since. Even during the times of the Delhi Sultanate, when it was technically levied, it was hardly ever collected. However, Aurangzeb did collect it and used it in part to raise an army to invade the Deccan. Rajput, Maratha, and Brahmin leaders were exempt as well. Additionally, everyone who earned under 52 rupees a year was exempt, so most peasants were excluded. The point of the jizya wasn't to raise money, since it didn't raise a lot of money. It was definitely an attempt to humiliate Hindus and, for the lack of a better term, to show them their place. This seems to have come not from Aurangzeb, but from the clergy, and he probably did it to please them because this was pretty much the only time when Aurangzeb treated Hindus and Muslims differently. On other occasions, he had not treated Muslims and non-Muslims differently. On one occasion, some rebels had been captured. Some of them were Hindu, some were Muslim. While the chief Qadi insisted that the Muslims be given light sentences and the Hindus be given a choice between Islam or execution. Aurangzeb didn't do that. He executed everyone. Such a secular. He also had the largest percentage of non-Muslim court members of any Mughal emperor. On one occasion, when asked to favor Muslims for government positions, he remarked, "What connection have earthly affairs with religion, and what right have administrative works to meddle with bigotry?" Then he went on to quote the Quran and say, "For you is your religion, and for me is mine." Even with jizya, a contemporary Hindu writer shows more contempt for the behavior of the corrupt collectors than the tax itself. This is also evident in his first finance minister, Maharaja Raghunath. He was Shah Jahan's minister and Aurangzeb kept him. He eventually became very powerful and almost served in the capacity of the prime minister. He died in 1663, but Aurangzeb remembered him and cherished his teachings. When Aurangzeb was about to die, more than 40 years after Raghunath, he wrote Raghunath's teachings on how to rule in letters to his sons. Like previous emperors, Aurangzeb saw Hindu temples as being under his protection, and so he gave patronage to them and protected them. He even gave land grants to priests to build new temples. On one occasion, he even remarked on the beauty of a temple he visited. Temples that were associated with the enemies of the state were a different story. He destroyed temples that were built by the families that were revolting against him during the Rajput rebellion. He also destroyed a temple where the priests had given refuge to Shivaji when he escaped from the Mughal capital. Temples were built by Hindu rulers to legitimize themselves. So, to delegitimize them, their enemies often destroyed temples. Even Hindu rulers did that to other Hindu rulers. While it's certainly true that he moved the Mughal Empire away from some Hindu traditions and returned it a bit to what he considered its Islamic roots, it was by no means an attempt to Islamize India. Contemporary sources written by Hindus don't mention the autocratic bigot tyrant that people often imagine today. In fact, all Hindus weren't the same. Hinduism is an umbrella term for a bunch of religious traditions. For example, the Rajput and the Marathas would both be considered Hindu today, but they themselves didn't see anything in common between them. The Rajputs at the court of the Mughals showed a lot of contempt for the Marathas and considered them below their rank. Aurangzeb's beliefs, and for that matter, Dara Shikoh's beliefs, weren't all that unusual for their time. While this statement is obviously true for Aurangzeb, let me explain how it was true for Dara Shikoh. Muslims and Hindus didn't exactly stay separated from each other's religious traditions. Sufi Islam was frankly very close to a simpler version of Hinduism, where Hindus had sadhus, the Muslims had khwajas, and these weren't mutually exclusive. Muslims visited sadhus while Hindus visited khwajas. In fact, the father of Shivaji Bhonsle, the great Hindu warrior, was named Shahaji because his father, Maluji Bhonsle, used to visit the shrine of a Sufi saint named Shah Sharif to ask God for a son. He had two sons and named them both after the Sufi, Shahaji and Sharifji. The same was true for law. Hindus and other non-Muslims frequently visited Islamic courts for their personal matters. To reiterate, he did crack down on religious minorities, but that was almost always political. He only cracked down on groups that were becoming a threat to him politically, such as the fellow Muslim Bohras of Gujarat and the rather young community of the Sikhs. Now, I know that a lot of people will say that I conveniently didn't mention his oppression and war against the Sikhs. This is where he was, in my opinion, the most oppressive. I am not mentioning that here because the story of the Sikhs deserves to be told in full, and I will make a separate video about Mughals and Sikhs, so I guess this discussion will continue in that video. Some other aspects of his incredible story are also to be told in separate videos, for instance, his relationship with the Europeans. So finally, did he destroy the Mughal Empire? Without a doubt, yes. He alone destroyed his dynasty and his empire. He was fully, completely responsible. Like most Turco-Mongol empires, the Mughal Empire revolved around the emperor who was prepared from childhood to fight his brothers and become emperor. Looking at Aurangzeb and his father Shah Jahan, both came to power because they were the most powerful among the princes. They had the support they needed, and they were capable commanders, and they had significant allies. Princes had to build their support and learn how to govern, and for that, they had to be given a bit of power, maybe a governorship or command of the army, or both. However, Aurangzeb kept as much power as he could for himself. He kept his sons and grandsons tucked away at court so history wouldn't repeat and he wouldn't be overthrown by his sons like he had done to his father. Two of his sons spent a long time in imprisonment. One was driven out of the country and one had not led an army in years when Aurangzeb died. This left the next generation, and even the one after that, weak and incapable. In his 25 years of absence from North India, many vassals had built power there and became too much for the next emperors to control. Immediately, the emperors became puppets of powerful nobles. All of this was because Aurangzeb was haunted by what he had done to his own father. So yes, Aurangzeb Alamgir destroyed the Mughal Empire. Aurangzeb is one of the most fascinating figures I have ever come across. Not only did he live an incredible and long life, but like many great rulers before and after him, Aurangzeb didn't think much of his rule. He didn't want to be remembered, and so he wished to be buried in a simple grave. He showed regret for his actions in his final letters. He wasn't happy with how he ruled, how he judged, and even about how pious he was. He felt ashamed to be facing God soon. In this way, he is no different from many other great kings in world history. Suleiman the Magnificent felt the same, Charles V felt the same, Abdurrahman III of Cordoba felt the same, Muhammad ibn Tughlaq felt the same, and Justinian felt the same. There's this poetic theme that the stories of the Mughal emperors have. Often the kings are undone by the things they wanted most. Aurangzeb was plagued by a desire to conquer all of India, which took the last 25 years of his life. He wanted to stay in power for as long as he lived, but he destroyed his empire in the process. Similarly, Shah Jahan considered himself special, maybe even divine, a supreme ruler who was humbled by his own son and locked up like a helpless old man. Jahangir coveted power so much that he was willing to fight his own father. In the end, he was so weak due to his addictions that he couldn't even lift a cup of wine, let alone rule an empire. Similarly, Akbar wanted nothing more than a son, and when he got that son, the son became hostile towards him. He had to prepare his grandson against his own son, tearing his family apart. I think if you were to ask the first 6 Mughals, also known as the Great Mughals, from Babur to Aurangzeb, whether they were successful rulers, the only one who might say yes is Humayun, who died young at the peak of his power. Aurangzeb might actually be the most relevant ruler of Indian history, in today's politics I mean. I think it's because of how many social identities were emerging during his reign, and even as a direct result of his actions. To name just 2, the Marathas and the Sikhs still remember him as a villain in the tales of their beginnings. The struggle of the Marathas started against him. It was against him that the Sikhs were militarized. As a result of this, Aurangzeb is irrelevant, and so intellectuals think about him a lot. A lot of this thinking is done in contrast to his great-grandfather. Where Akbar is seen as tolerant, Aurangzeb is considered a bigot. As a result of this debate, their differences are often exaggerated. The same happens in the debate surrounding him and Dara Shikoh. Dara Shikoh is thought of as a great tolerant man who would have become a great ruler, whereas Aurangzeb is seen as a religiously conservative man who cracked down on religious minorities. Though at the time, the Hindus at the courts were divided in their support of Dara or Aurangzeb. Most Rajputs supported Dara, while most Marathas supported Aurangzeb. All of his actions and policies should be judged with the context in mind. In popular imagination, he isn't even considered an Indian ruler sometimes. I mean, look at this portrayal of Aurangzeb in the movie Tanaji. He's played by actor Luke Kenny, a man whose parents are both European. By the way, in this scene, Aurangzeb is playing human chess because the point that he's supposed to be evil didn't come across well enough already. Aurangzeb is often considered to be too Muslim to be an Indian ruler, related more to the Turkic Delhi Sultanate rulers than the Indian Mughals who married and integrated with Indian Hindus. Although his desire to be forgotten will never be fulfilled. Even during his lifetime, he was immortalized by John Dryden in his drama Aurangzeb in 1675. Whenever there is a question about Muslims and Hindus on the Indian subcontinent, Aurangzeb has to be mentioned. Some even go so far as to say that the partition of British India into the countries of Pakistan and India was set in stone on the day that Aurangzeb won over his brothers. He will always be the great antagonist of the story of the Sikh religion. So obviously his story is going to be told as long as these communities that formed in his time remain. His story is going to be told for at least as long as India remains. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. On the screen right now, you can see the names and tiers of the patrons. You can join them by pledging $1 or more to support the channel. Thank you for watching.